The book of Genesis ends with Joseph and his brothers and their father Jacob moving to the land of Egypt. We hear that God has blessed them and allowed them to grow and to multiply there. Joseph's forgiveness towards his brothers and Jacob's blessing upon his 12 sons ends the book of Genesis. And this is where we pick up now with the book of Exodus. The second book of the Pentateuch is the book of Exodus, from the Greek word departure. Here we pick up the story where it left off at the end of the book of Genesis. Well, not exactly. After about 300 years of living in Egypt, we now find the descendants of Jacob go from being favored in the land to being oppressed in the land. As their numbers had increased tremendously, they numbered maybe between 2 to 4 million at this point. They continued to be oppressed by the new king of Egypt. We read, the Egyptians then dreaded the Israelites and reduced them to cruel slavery. The stage is set for God's powerful work of deliverance to be once again made visible through his servant Moses. The book of Exodus takes us through the well-known events of the Exodus, the birth of Moses, his call to lead God's people out of slavery, which includes the plagues of Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the arrival at Mount Sinai, where God gives clear instructions to his people through the Ten Commandments and different ritual and moral teachings. Moses teaches his people how they are to live and behave through the series of chapters at the end of the book of Exodus and beyond. The book of Exodus ends with detailed laws regarding worship, sacrifice, and morality, how to live. And these will shape the lives of the people prior to their arrival at the promised land.
Exodus chapter 1. Now Joseph and all his brothers and that whole generation died. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They became so numerous and strong that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, who knew nothing of Joseph, came to power in Egypt. He said to his subjects, "Look how numerous and powerful the Israelite people are growing, more so than we ourselves. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them to stop their increase. Otherwise, in time of war, they too may join our enemies to fight against us, and so leave our country."
The first section of the book of Exodus deals with the Israelites' time in Egypt and the call of Moses. Moses, who is invited by God in a very powerful way to do the impossible. Now that's important, because the book of Exodus is about teaching the chosen people how God is asking them to do the impossible, and even in the midst of their disbelief, God makes it happen. We saw a little bit of that already in the book of Genesis with Abraham and then his son Isaac and Jacob. They were asked to do things that on a human level seemed impossible, and yet God made them happen and continued to strengthen their faith. Here we have Moses, who is asked by God through his encounter on Mount Sinai with the burning bush. He is invited by God to go and to free his people. And this seems impossible for Moses, and he keeps coming up with excuses, with reasons why he's not the man for the job, why this can't be done. First, he says that he doesn't have the skills. He doesn't have what it takes. And God says, no, you do. And then he says, but I don't even know your name, and how am I going to speak? And God says, well, my name is I am who am, Yahweh. And then he says, but I'm not even a good speaker. How am I going to communicate these important things? And God says, well, I'll give you a speaker. I'll give you Aaron, your brother, who will speak on your behalf. And so God responds to all his excuses. In other words, God knows the fears and difficulties that Moses has. And God continues to say, no, I want you. I want you. In spite of all your fears and worries and anxieties, you have what it takes, and I will do the rest. I think that's an important spiritual principle we see here. So often I think we may feel like what God is asking of us is too much, it's impossible. And it's true. It is impossible to be completely faithful to God, to keep all of his commandments, to love all the time, to forgive even our enemies. Yes, what God asks of us is impossible, and we are all broken and imperfect. But you know what? God will do it, because nothing is impossible for God. And God invites us into his incredible work of making the impossible happen. And he wants you, he wants me, he wants us. The theme of trust is an essential one in the entire Bible, but especially here in the story of Moses. Exodus begins by showing a stark contrast from what once was to what is now. As we read, then a new king, who knew nothing of Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Worldly powers are fickle and changeable. They operate based on fear and opportunism. The chosen people have to learn and relearn the important lesson that they can only trust in God, because only God will keep his words and promises. This will continue to be the theme, the choice that people will have to make throughout the Bible. Just as Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis had to choose between God and their own egos, so all have to choose between God and this world. As Jesus so famously said, you cannot serve both God and mammon, God and money, God and possessions. There can be no compromises when it comes to the life of faith. Only God is faithful. Only God leads us to truth and freedom. Apart from God, there is only death. What's also very beautiful in the book of Exodus is how Moses, along with Aaron, are sent to see Pharaoh, and through the 10 plagues that God sends upon Egypt, they slowly begin to convince Pharaoh to let the people go. And this is the common refrain, let my people go, let my people go. I love that refrain, because this is what God continues to say, I believe, even in our day. Whenever God sees that we are in the clutches of sin and worldliness and selflessness, we are imprisoned by our own sinfulness, God continues to say, let my people go, let my people be free, let my people follow where I will take them. I think it's important to remember that God will continue to bring about what he did in Egypt. God continues to do this through Jesus, even to this day, helping us fighting our battles for us if we continue to remain faithful to Him.
Exodus chapter 3. When the Lord saw him coming over to look at it more closely, God called out to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses." He answered, "Here I am." God said, "Come no nearer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. I am the God of your father," he continued, "the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. But the Lord said, "I have witnessed the affliction of my people in Egypt, and have heard the cry of complaint against their slave drivers. So I know well what they are suffering. Therefore I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and lead them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the country of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So indeed the cry of Israelites has reached me, and I have truly noted that the Egyptians are oppressing them. Come now, I will send you to Pharaoh to lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt?" He answered, "I will be with you, and this shall be your proof that it is I who have sent you. When you bring my people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this very mountain." "But," said Moses to God, "when I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' if they ask me, 'What is his name?' what am I to tell them?" God replied, "I am who am." Then he added, "This is what you shall tell the Israelites: I am sent me to you."
In the story of Moses, we see many examples of what is known as typology in the Bible. And that's events and people who begin to point clearly to the promised Messiah or to the events which will happen in the future. And so here, just as chosen people were led from slavery to freedom, we are all led by Jesus from sin to holiness. Just as Moses saved the chosen people from oppression, Jesus is the new Moses who leads us to new freedom. Just as Moses gave the chosen people the Passover meal as a sign of the pathway to freedom, Jesus gives the new Passover meal in the Eucharist. Just as the chosen people were given bread from heaven, manna from heaven, while they were in the wilderness, it was given to sustain them and to show them that God cares for them. We are given true bread from heaven, as Jesus said, in the Eucharist at Mass to sustain us on our journey. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent on a pole in the wilderness so that whoever looks upon it may be healed, so Jesus was lifted up on the cross for our healing. The examples of this kind of typology is a beautiful reminder to us that the Bible is meant to be seen as one book, even though it contains many individual books. God is the ultimate author of the Bible, and we see that through this kind of connection between these different books. Already in Genesis, in Exodus, we see God's hand in preparing the hearts and minds of the people for what will come in the future, for the promised Son of God incarnate. The last plague is an important one. All the plagues that are sent upon Pharaoh in Egypt are really a powerful sign to show that God, the only God who exists, is fighting against the false gods of Egypt. All the plagues represent different gods that Egyptians had made for themselves in order to have some kind of control even over their religion. And the last plague is the most powerful one because it has to do with taking their firstborn. And the firstborn in Egypt was always consecrated to the gods, to the false gods. And so the power of God is on display. I will take what you believe is protected by these gods, but these gods don't exist. They are not real. I am the only God. And so the last plague is associated with the healing, the protection against this last plague through the Passover meal. This Passover meal, which will become now such an important part of the Jewish tradition. Every year they will commemorate this passing over of the angel of death from their place and sparing their only son by the sacrifice of the lamb and the sign of the blood of the lamb on the doorposts. The eating of the last meal, this last meal before their journey, known as the Passover meal, which symbolizes the passing over of the angel of death from them, and God saving them and saving their firstborn, and then ultimately saving them by leading them out of Egypt.
Exodus chapter 16. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will now rain down bread from heaven for you. Each day the people are to go out and gather their daily portion. Thus will I test them to see whether they follow my instructions or not. On the sixth day, however, when they prepare what they bring in, let it be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So Moses and Aaron told all the Israelites, At evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord as he heeds your grumbling against him.
The journey of Moses and the chosen people from Egypt to the Promised Land was longer than expected, but exactly as long as it needed to be. What the chosen people did not realize was how much they had been influenced through their life in Egypt, how worldly they had become. Their enthusiasm, which accompanied their first weeks of journeying out of Egypt, was quickly extinguished by the difficulty and the danger of the journey. The path to the Promised Land was as much a physical journey as it was a journey of faith, a journey of the heart. They had to learn once again what it meant to trust God. Moses learns very quickly how weak their faith is and how quickly they are willing to give up and return to the land of comfort. The story of the Ten Commandments is one that we have to touch upon because it's such a revealing story. Once the Israelites make it to Mount Sinai, after the crossing of the Red Sea, after grumbling against Moses for not having enough to eat, and God sending them bread from heaven, manna from heaven, which symbolizes the true bread from heaven in the New Testament, in the Eucharist, the body of Jesus. And then, after all those different difficulties, tribulations, finally Moses goes up the Mount Sinai in order to receive the Ten Commandments. And after he has gone longer than expected, the people of Israel, again, they rebel. They are impatient. They don't want to wait. And so they force Aaron to create an image of the God of Israel in the form of a golden calf. When Moses returns, he has to intercede with God for the people, because once again they have turned against him. They've done what they shouldn't do. If only they had waited. Their impatience led them to do what the Egyptians taught them to do, which is to take control over their own religion, their own faith, and to create images of their gods and false gods. God has to continually break down this false idea of religion by leading the people back, by giving them the commandments. If only they had waited, if only they had patience and trust in God, in Moses, whom God had chosen. But you see, this is the trouble that they continually face. Their impatience, they're over-influenced by the life they experience in Egypt. And so the journey will have to continue, and the commandments will have to be implemented in order for the Jewish people, the chosen people, to truly experience the freedom God wants to give them. The lure of the world is real, and the path of God is difficult. Jesus recounted this so many times in passages like, "Unless you take up your cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple." Or, "Unless a grain of wheat dies, it cannot bear fruit." Or, "My path is narrow and the path of destruction is wide." Sounds familiar? God cannot give us the promised land until our faith is healed through the test of suffering and perseverance, through the test of journeying not only in a physical way, but also in a spiritual way. The journey of the heart, of learning how to once again trust God more than we trust this world. Trust God even more than I trust myself.
Exodus chapter 24. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain, and while you are there, I will give you the stone tablets on which I have written the commandments intended for their instruction." So Moses set out with Joshua, his aide, and went up to the mountain of God. The elders, however, had been told by him, "Wait here for us until we return to you. Aaron and Hur are staying with you. If anyone has a complaint, let him refer the matter to them." After Moses had gone up, a cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled upon Mount Sinai. The cloud covered it for 6 days, and on the 7th day he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord was seen as a consuming fire on the mountaintop. But Moses passed into the midst of the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and there he stayed for 40 days and 40 nights.
The events on Mount Sinai are so important that many chapters of the book of Exodus are now devoted to the teaching of the people, how they are to live, how they are to worship. The last chapters of the book of Exodus propose proper worship of God. Proper worship is going to be now the key in the teachings of the chosen people how to live. God is the one who teaches. Notice, God is the one who leads them into proper worship. It is not something that is to be made and created by the Israelites, but rather something to be learned by listening to God's revelation. The chosen people spend the last chapters of the book of Exodus sitting at the foot of the Mount Sinai, waiting for the commandments and teachings of God to be communicated to them through Moses, and they do not move anywhere until they have heard and accepted the precepts of God, the 10 Commandments, along with teachings around proper worship of God. Here we see the rights and institutions of the priesthood through the Levite tribe. We see the construction of the tent of meetings, the Ark of the Covenant. We see the beautiful descriptions of how an ordination of the Levites as priests is to be conducted. The great details that are put into the last chapters of the book of Exodus regarding worship and ordination and offering praise to God. These reveal to us a very important truth. The journey of the heart is closely connected to the proper worship of God, to a life of prayer. The journey of the chosen people in the wilderness takes 40 years, and yet in the book of Exodus we only cover the first 3 months of the journey of the Israelites, from Egypt to Mount Sinai, where they reflect on the 10 Commandments and the rites and rituals surrounding God's worship. Later we will continue reflecting on the rest of the journey, the many years in the wilderness, as the chosen people continue to learn and relearn how important it is to trust God and to follow only Him. Join me next week as we move on and reflect on the book of Leviticus.